Okay, looks like we're live. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this 68th episode of Techno Crime Fighters Forum. I'm Ramola D. It is the 5th of July, 2018, and I'm here this morning with NSA whistleblower Melton Stewart, Dr. Katherine Horton, and Dr. Millicent Black. And we're here, as always, just to have a public conversation about the state of surveillance in this country today in the US and also in UK, and in the whole of Europe and in the rest of the world, including Australia, New Zealand, various countries of the world, Canada, etc. So we're here to speak about how global surveillance has simply morphed into surveillance abuse, and how weapons are being used in the populace. Electromagnetic weapons are being used, and they're being used under the guise of both Department of Justice surveillance activities and Department of Defense experimental weapons testing activities via various federal weapons testing contracts. So these are, as you can tell, egregious and horrific things, and we have been doing a lot of research, writing and speaking about this for a very long time, and we continue to do so. And today, one of the focuses that we are going to be looking at is the police state. How actual police in the US and the UK are behaving currently, what they are doing to people, how they are kind of flexing their muscle and behaving like bullies. No doubt there are wonderful, great, good police everywhere. You know, I saw a video recently of Boston police, singing, and I promptly tweeted it out, singing in their car. I think they were singing the American anthem. Great singers, wonderful. We like to see police singing, not shooting. And I'm all for, lauding and applauding the good behavior of police. But unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of bad behavior. So, perhaps they need a little talking to. And we're going to be giving them that. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Karen at this point. It's a very momentous time in our nation's history. It's the day past the 4th of July. And I think Karen can address some of what we are interested in talking about today. So go ahead, Karen.
All right, thank you. I was pondering the irony of celebrating July 4th with everything that's going on in the country and the facade of having these rights while the deep state and other people are eating away at them, And I saw a meme that I just absolutely love, and it's a picture of an American flag, and it says, "If you want to thank a soldier, be the kind of American worth fighting for." And that really struck me because I was thinking about doing an essay along those lines, but the meme is just tremendous to me. It's very hard hitting. And I had actually posted on my Facebook a little essay. I said, this is going to be controversial, but here we are, and we've got parents and people screaming about taking away the Second Amendment because we have all these school shooters. Well, how is it in the 1930s and 40s and 50s? There were gun clubs at all these high schools, and we didn't have these kind of shooters. What's going on? And then I said, there is a relationship between the people who are finding themselves stalked and harassed and slandered by their good neighbors and these shootings. Just think about the fact you send little Johnny to school, and then he and his friends decide to pick on Timothy or Leroy because maybe they read books, they don't go out for sports, or maybe they're just a little different. Maybe they have no idea what's going on in that child's home. Maybe they're being abused. Maybe they're being neglected. So maybe they're not behaving happy-go-lucky at school. Maybe they're staying to themselves because they're deeply hurt. But they get picked on and they get bullied. And some of them are driven absolutely over the edge. Now, is it right to go and shoot up the place? Of course not. But how much do you think a human being can take without acting out? And so, something like this happens and parents, basically scream and cry. And yes, some of their children have been hurt or maybe killed. And there's a reason, to scream and cry when you've lost a child, But could anybody have helped the situation? Maybe if the parents are at home talking about, oh, we got rid of Jonesy, he was about to take the promotion because he basically is an overachiever, and Frank here had been here 30 years waiting for a promotion, and we were afraid that he was going to take the promotion from Frank, who's a good old boy and drinks beers with us every night and isn't going to be too hard on us. So we basically sabotaged, this other guy and got rid of him. So we really taught him. What's that teaching the child? to get rid of your competition in an unfair, dirty way. Or maybe, the mom's talking about, well, I really hate Mrs. Smith because her daughter competed and got onto the cheerleading squad and beat out my daughter. So I'm going to get back at her. You're teaching your children that adults bully and that it's the thing to do. And then you get surprised when vicious bullying at school happens and some kid who doesn't have the emotional maturity or strength to withstand it grabs a gun and goes back to school, because maybe he's asked the teachers, maybe he's asked the principals for help and they told him, suck it up, because they didn't want the parents mad at them, the parents of the children doing the bullying. And not only do some of the kids who were doing the bullying maybe get shot, but innocent kids were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. So and I asked in the little essay that I put on my Facebook, I said, is it the guns or is it us? And if we are so self-absorbed and selfish and cruel, and we're passing this on to our children, is it the guns? Is it us? And what we're doing with this type of toxic mentality, and then people joining, of course, InfraGard and other vigilantes where they viciously harass people to the point of losing their jobs, becoming homeless, and maybe suicide. And so this is the toxic poison that these people are teaching their children, and children are dying before they're even adults from this poison being learned at home, being learned in society. So I think we really have to re-examine our society. There were people who fought and died in 1776, and they knew they were going to. I mean, not all the founding fathers came through unscathed. Some of them lost everything, including their lives. And they knew they would. They said that they knew that they would, that it was a possibility, to give us freedom, to tell us that the rights of the individual were paramount, because if an individual could retain his rights and his opinion, be left alone for differing with the mob, then everybody was safe. If you were safe to disagree with the mob, then you were safe. I mean, there's a saying about basically democracy being basically the sheep is able to, in a constitutional republic, actually, if you follow the laws, two wolves and a sheep eating lunch, the wolves can't say, well, we're two against one, we're going to eat you. No, the rights of the sheep as an individual says, no, you can't, because we're a nation of laws, not of mob rule. I mean, the real definition of what we have is a constitutional republic, which means it boils down to laws, not just mob rule, which is a basic democracy. But we've gone back to thinking that a mob rule is what we need. That if the mob doesn't like what the Constitution says, they just ignore it and do what they want. And that gets into what the police are being told. The police are basically getting told that they are supposed to keep people in line, and the heck with the Constitution, and sometimes the heck with the law. If that's not on your side, you just do it anyway and let them sue you later and see what the court says. And so we've got all kinds of horrific stories. And I was telling Romola and Katherine and Millicent, I've started to keep the links of absolutely horrific police stories where a policeman is, one story that I related that was just unbelievable. And I don't remember why the policeman was called, but he went to a house, maybe for a disturbance or something, walked into the house, and the people had a puppy, not a full-grown dog, but a puppy, and he went to shoot it without provocation. And instead, he missed the dog and shot their 9-year-old daughter in the face. Okay. And there was another story recently about police who saw a car that, excuse me, that ran off the road, crashed, and they surrounded the car, demanded the man get out, put his hands up, et cetera, et cetera. And he didn't. Well, why didn't he? Because he was having a seizure. So what did they do? They pepper sprayed him because he wouldn't follow their directions. And there are just so many stories like this. I saw one clip of a man getting shot in a wheelchair. There's no excuse for this. There's absolutely no excuse for this. I mean, at this point in time, it would appear that that police are told, don't worry about it, just shoot the person, we'll sort it out later. I'm sorry, but police are supposed to be peacekeepers who want to try to correct whatever is going on with that person and not just shoot them and ask questions later. I mean, they're shooting dogs, they're shooting children, um, they're shooting people in the middle of a stroke or a seizure, and not asking questions. Um, I mean, I respect the police. I was going a little fast probably about a year ago, and a policeman came behind me, turned on the light, and I pulled over to a side street, because it's rather a busy street, and parked and put both of my hands out the car window to let him know I am not doing anything in the car that might endanger you. He came up, told me I was speeding a little bit, not enough to be real concerned, but enough to tell me. And I thanked him and he left. He didn't give me a ticket, but so I knew that in this day and age, they are very careful and might be concerned. So that's why I put my hands out the window just to show respect for him. But I think it needs to be a two-way street. You've got people saying that police are maligned and abused, and then you've got these horrific police stories that make the news. Well, I understand that they're having trouble getting police, to basically getting people to volunteer to be police. Okay, I understand that, but there's a reason. They really do need to vet their police officers more, and they need to give them continuous training. Maybe you get in, how to use a gun, basic laws, even though some of them really do need to know more about laws, such as it's not a crime to film your encounter with the police because you're trying to keep the encounter honest. Okay. So that's a big contention point, and I believe there have been rulings saying there's no problem filming an encounter with a policeman. It keeps you both, on your best behavior. But still, we're seeing police that will grab somebody's cell phone and either not give it back to them or actually destroy it, by throwing it or something because they're having a tantrum that they're being filmed. And I'm sorry, that's not right, because we want to keep both sides honest. But we really do have to look at our society, and red flags are going off everywhere, and people are avoiding them, blaming guns instead of parenting, blaming anything and everything other than our not being civil to each other. Us demanding that we get our way, and hey, me and 5 neighbors think that you ought to paint your shutters green, so if you don't, we're going to beat you up. That's not American. I'm sorry, that's not even civilization. So this 4th of July, I think we really do have to think about the fact that right now, for a certain people, with targeted individuals and others, that America is not a free country. It's not. It's become an oppressive police state. And it has become an oppressive police state based on the lie in regard to terrorism. But what is really, really happening is that the government is subverting our country to make it more totalitarian, and then telling police that they're keeping the peace when they're not. They're suppressing dissidents, and they're suppressing the First Amendment for people to say this isn't right, and you're picking and choosing how to apply a law when every single person has to follow this law. It doesn't matter that, oh, this person is black or white. They don't have to follow the law, or we're going to arrest them for spitting on the ground, as where we really don't care about if anybody else does, or we're going to say that, oh, you're of such a position in society that we're going to totally ignore the fact that you are a pedophile, and this, this guy looks cross-eyed at a 5-year-old next door, and you run and arrest him and throw him in the jail for really essentially nothing, because you've decided to call him a pedophile or call in a false police report that the police don't actually check out anymore. They just come in guns blazing and with assumptions that you've done something wrong. They're not interviewing the person being reported. They're not understanding they're being played for fools all over the country by people calling in something that's just not true or just not even feasible. So again, this 4th of July, I really think that we as a nation have got to re-examine the fact that we're not only losing this nation, but we're losing our civilization. This is not civilization. This is war. This is oppression, and this is basically the government becoming the biggest bully on the block and other people around you aiding and abetting with no thought to the fact that this is so totally unconstitutional that it should ring bells for them, but it's not. They're so frustrated with the threat of the bogeyman terrorism that they're out to get anybody to make themselves feel better, make themselves feel important, and to earn those tax dollars that are given them under the table. So this is not an honorable society. We really do have to re-examine. And that would really honor the soldiers who have died for us. That we go back to becoming the decent people and having a decent society that is worth fighting for. And after almost 30 years at NSA, trying to defend this country and getting the treatment that I have from the government and from neighbors who assume the worst without knowing anything in the world, that has put questions in my mind as to why did I defend this nation? What is it that we have now that's worth defending at all? There are remnant people that I would fight to the death for, but right now the whole nation is questionable. And I've said I will not fly American flag until this changes. And I may only ever fly the American flag from 1776 because that is when we as Americans really understood what freedom was and appreciated it. It's not the freedom to bully. So I'm hoping at some point in time, America wakes up even more fully than it's starting to, because we've got to get this country back or we're done, So that would be my opening thoughts.
That's really profound. Thanks so much, Karen. So much in there. But I think everybody in chat really appreciates what you're talking about, because we are really talking about the situation as it stands in the US today. Millicent, did you want to jump in on that?
I do want to jump in on that. Even just one quick, I guess, note, even with the 1776 flag, that did not include African Americans. Mm-hmm. We were still in slavery. So we would have to find the flag that was flying after Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation and after the African Americans were actually free, that slaves were actually free, before we would be able to say that there was some equality in this nation. And even after that, they came up with the color of law so they could still do anything to us whenever they wanted to. And when you factor in the targeting situation, we still get to the point. I'm not sure about the number of African Americans, but we do know that the majority of us are women. 70 to 75% of those of us who are being harassed in what is called electronic harassment, organized stalking, are women. How can that be? When we think about that, and when we think about equality, we think about what's happening in our communities and how someone can just call into a police station and wage a claim against you. We'll find out that many of those claims are about someone in an African American community. I watched the movie, it was called American Violet, and it was about Talia, Texas. It was a community where the people in that community were constantly being raided. And they were constantly being raided because the DA's office indeed did have a a deal going that they just needed to arrest Black people. So they would literally set the Black people up in that community, and then they would send in a raid team, and they would haul out all of the African Americans, put them in jail. This one woman, and then they would try to make a deal with them to get them out, even though they knew they were innocent. So one woman did make a deal, but another one would not. The woman who made the deal said, if I don't make this deal, I'm going to lose my housing in the project. I'm going to lose my children. And because of that, I've got to make this deal, even though she knew she was innocent. And the other woman would not. She took the bait. She went to jail, and the ACLU came in and they fought for them. They fought for the entire community, and the investigations showed that the district attorney was actually making deals with the higher cartel, is about the way you would have to say it, to be paid for hauling in African Americans, for hauling in Black people on quote unquote drug charges. So then that seems that the CIA was somewhere in the background of all of that. But the ACLU actually did make a case. They actually won the case for this woman, and the charges against all of the people in that community were dropped. But it was because there was this underlying, as Karen has already indicated, money exchange going on. But why did it have to be African Americans? And it was. There is actually a book written about Murray County called The Color of Law. And there's another one that's entitled No More Social Lynching.
Did this all happen in Murray County, Allison?
The one that I just described happened in a town called Tulia, Texas.
Okay. But
here in Murray County, we did have a race riot that happened in the, I'm not going to get the date right, so I'll look it up. But it actually did happen here. And it was indeed considered to be a social lynching because a white radio repairman made a negative comment to an African-American woman who had gone in to pick up her radio. Her son had been in the Marines, I believe, and he had come home. He went up to that man to defend his mother's honor. And the things that ensued after that were several days of unrest in Murray County, and that is here where I live now. There were guns, and it was just interesting how the African-American community stood up for this young man that they had to slip out of town. But the outcome of all of that was Thurgood Marshall actually came in to defend the men who were arrested. There was a death, I think, or maybe more, that had happened. Eleanor Roosevelt came in to show the support of the presidency on behalf of the African Americans. And I guess all of this is just going around to show you that the color of law has now extended itself, not just to the African American community, but also to females, as they have embraced or included 70 to 75% of us in what is considered to be electronic harassment. And that's where anybody can essentially call in. I was told in 1996 that they were told they could blame anything on me. Is that not the same idea? Realizing that blaming anything on me across what is now a 22-year span of time is supposed to keep a bogus investigation going until I'm dead. Now, what people don't see is that there are 53 chips in my body that are being signaled by directed energy that is being used to destroy my health. What they would never know, except that I tell it, is that the surgery that I just had in February, for which I am still 5 months later almost having physical therapy, the surgery itself costed $300,000. That doesn't include the cost of 3 weeks in rehab and all of the weeks after that of physical therapy. And yet all that's necessary is for someone to blame anything on someone else. And then you have a big police what exactly? Because when I tell the police the truth, when I give the police real evidence of who's doing these things to me and how this came about, When I show the police this man's military record, they say it's nothing we can do. So I call the military. The military says, well, it's a civil matter now. He's retired. He's no longer a part of the Department of Defense. What do we do?
Well, the police are inadequate. They will not investigate. And as far as oath keepers, I have very often called them oath breakers because they think about their own convenience much more so now than your rights and your safety. I mean, you get smart ass remarks from police saying, well, if these people kill you, then we'll investigate. Thank you.
That's exactly what I didn't get it quite like that. The first question that the chief asked me when I had a meeting with he and the city manager was, were you in the military? Because he knew that that's supposed to be the only way I could have a chip in me. No, never. So then he did indeed go on to say, well, if he kills you, we'll make sure we get to your daughter, because he knows that my youngest daughter's life is also regularly threatened to me. Right.
Yeah, you prove it by dying, and then we'll pay attention. Oh,
right.
Well, lovely, lovely.
Well, sorry, my take on this is that these people are members of a criminal network. Their words are not to be taken on their surface value. When the police, the Chief Potts and Captain Potts, we both have now enough evidence for both, that they are willfully letting you be mutilated by this criminal psychopath. And I have actually an audio recording of Captain Potts lying to me, claiming he is not getting any emails from you describing your, actual what's happening to you. And I had a list of emails where you almost daily or every second day, you sent an email exactly describing about, I would say 40 to 50 offenses per day to him, each of which would be not just actionable, but would be the content of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. So Captain Potts I can prove he's a liar. He's a member of a criminal network, because why would a police officer lie like that? Why would he not be concerned? And then I think what happened, if we make the hypothesis that, we are led to believe that these people are police officers because they sit in a building that has police written on its front, a sign that can be bought for affordable prices these days. They have some sort of uniform and they carry a badge. All of this costs peanuts. And if a criminal cartel moved in and would want to mimic a police, they would exactly, provide their officers with exactly the sort of stuff. And then the police officers would not be behaving like real police officers. And I think this is exactly what happened. We can prove that these people are not behaving like normal police. So then my assumption is they are not a police force. They are members of a criminal gang. Chief Potts and Chief Troy Potts and Captain Tim Potts, by the way, the name, is that really common in Tennessee, or are these family relations? Is this a nepotist, little infestation in the Columbia Police Department? So I don't know, is that his son, his cousin, or what? So these two, I think, are a member of a criminal gang. And what the members of the criminal gang said to you, Millicent, is that they were gloating to you, and they said, well, we wait until you die, and then we will get to your daughter. Get to my daughter, how exactly? Are you saying you'll get my daughter and then kill her like you killed me, Chief Potts? Is that what you're saying? Because I think that's what he was saying. I really think that's what he was saying. We now I am now a witness to, I think, a year and a half of Millicent sending daily, or, within 48 hours, logs, so several logs every week, almost daily, of direct live mutilation for a year and a half. And Chief Potts and Captain Potts did nothing. So this means they are not a police force. I would say what we're now waking up to is that what was labeled to us as a police force is not a police force. And I think when we look into it, we'll find that every single police force on the planet now is a private corporation.
I've shared before about the murder of Dr. Heather Basil, a 39-year-old female who had been stalked for the report of the paper said 3 years at least, by a former police officer who was also a former Army veteran. She had reported over and over and over. He was really aggressive, sending flowers, I think, to her office, meeting her at a car, things like that. So she had been reporting him for several years, and he killed her outside of a department store and then killed himself. The paper said that she had been told by the police department, or maybe it was the sheriff's department, said they told her to buy a gun. Now, she has taken an oath to do no harm, and she is reporting that someone is following her in a threatening manner, and they knew this man was trained to do violence, but that didn't seem to help save her life. Well, after I heard about it, and I was actually given more information about it by a then police officer, I contacted the police department to ask for reports. I wanted to see what kind of police reports they had about her calling in and her complaints of being stalked and harassed. They had one report, and that was the report that was placed in their file on the day she died.
Yeah, what that means is that this is now hardcore evidence that all the police officers who were involved with the case are members of a criminal network. And I've been trying to lead people onto this and to actually get this to understand, you know, but they are still struggling. And I'm saying just because they have a badge and a uniform doesn't mean that they are police. You have to look at what they do. So if you just, you know, approach this whole thing, let's say you came from Mars and you knew nothing about planet Earth and you understood the concept of policing, and then you were asked, can you tell me, is this a police officer or is this a criminal? Well, how would you say if you're, somebody from Mars? You would say, okay, let's look at what these people do, because they could be police officers or they could be criminals, you know, using fancy dress and pretending to be police officers. And then you would say, okay, let's look at the cases. How do they process cases? How many cases do they solve? And how many cases do they process like the mafia would? As in, not at all, assault victims, let them die, gloat at them, jeer at them, and so on. And I have to say, I have now looked at every single, I've got a police case that I'm involved in my own, in Britain. There's a police case in Germany, a police case here in Switzerland, and I'm aware of your police correspondence, Millicent. And I'm also aware of the police correspondence of Siegfried Thomas, or rather with the authorities. And in all of the 5 cases that are pretty much, you know, to first order randomly picked, you know, if you don't assume that there's targeting, all I have seen is the operation of a criminal network. I have just seen exactly 100% consistency with the hypothesis that these are members of a criminal network, including Mr. Schoch here at Unterengstringen, Zurich, who was openly gloating at me and said, well, when are you going to have the court case? You're not going to have a court case. And meanwhile, my house keeps being broken into and the police is literally 5 houses down. So is that a police officer or is that a member of a criminal gang? And I would say Mr. Schoch is a member of a criminal gang. Chief Potts is a member of a criminal network. You know, the people whom I met at Ashton under Lyne or under Lynn police station in Greater Manchester, they are members of a criminal network, which would also explain all the child trafficking in exactly that area of Manchester, going all the way back to the Moors murders. If the police are organizing, if they are actually organized criminals and they are organizing the child trafficking together with MI5 and the sex trafficking, the drug running, the absolute everything, if MI5 and the police are organized crime and are part of it, then I get 100% consistency of the data. If I assume that there's a police force, I cannot explain the evidence I have. I cannot explain the data, you know, and this is something shocking. If I now pull all the criminal cases I know about, it's literally, my folders are piling up pretty high right now. And not once have I seen even a shade or a trace or whiff of a police investigation. I have never in my life seen accurate forensic reporting, accurate forensic analysis, police reports that actually are right or even exist. I have not seen them. Where are they? I'm now pulling from several countries. So now I'm making the hypothesis that the police has never existed, or this is my assumption, or for sure I have evidence for the fact that the police has not been operational at all in any capacity for at least 2 to 3 decades. 2 decades for sure. So I think this is the reality, and we are still struggling when we're talking about the police, because we're still being badged. It's the badge effect. Oh, look, I've got a piece of plastic here that I can make in China for 50 cents. Oh, of course, that means you've got a forensics department, you're a police officer, and you're gonna, fight for my life. No, I just showed you your 50-cent plastic badge. That's all, That's the only thing you can assume, is that I've got a 50 cents Chinese-made plastic badge. And that's that,
Katherine, you can't say, though, that they're all bad. At least I would not say that they're all bad, because I've had some prove to me that they aren't.
But, when you say that, did you ever witness a police investigation? Because what you witnessed is nice people, a nice guy coming to you, saying some nice words, and then leaving and doing absolutely jack all. But have you ever actually seen one actual evidence that one guy filed police reports and said, yes, this is true, this is Millicent's case, this has to be investigated?
Well, let me ask something. You have a policeman who says, yes, you're right, this crime happened. Yes, you're right, this is not correct. It should be dealt with, but they don't want to deal with it, so nothing I can do, ma'am. Goodbye. What kind of police stays around and doesn't push for some kind of change? I mean, you become a police officer, and then your higher ups tell you, yeah, we're going to pick out certain people and we're not going to help them. It doesn't matter what crimes are done to them. They're non-entities. Does that not strike you as wrong? Does that not strike you as maybe an opposite reason as to why you actually became a police officer? Is it really, oh, I can't help you, they tell me I can't, when you know morally that is wrong, and that legally that is wrong? And yet these people just shrug their shoulders and go about writing tickets on cars and not doing anything controversial. What good are you doing?
But then also, when a police officer gets hired by an entity, a group of people who come with 50 cents Chinese plastic badges to him, and then he's doing the job, and then he realizes there's horrific crime happening, and then his superiors, who hired him with plastic badges and letterheads, suddenly say, oh, never mind, we actually thought we're totally cool with the criminality. We're literally down with the criminals here. At what point do people wake up and think, hang on, does it maybe mean that what I thought was the police was actually organized crime? Above a certain level, employing little, minion morons who then, go out giving the speed tickets because that brings in money for the mafia, how much criminality do we have to actually see before people think, hang on, what if it was just called the police from the start and it never was the police? Because I'll give you an alternative hypothesis where there's ever more increasing evidence that that's actually reality. And we were running around in La La Land, and we were being fooled by, shining, illuminated signs saying police, which costs, I think, less than $200, and, 50 cents badges. Because I would say an alternative hypothesis is this: a police force has never, ever existed. It only appeared in Sherlock Holmes stories and in TV movies and stuff like that. But on paper, it has never, ever, the Metropolitan Police was never, ever, ever, ever set up to investigate crime, ever. Because the people who set it up were basically organized criminals. The systems were already in deep capture. And the only thing that they wanted is to have some sort of, accepted goon squad to keep anybody at bay who might possibly infringe on their criminal operations. And what if these criminals got together a long time ago, so let's say 2,000 years ago, and founded something that is a corporation under canon law, under church law, which is universal. And then they call it, say, the Crown Corporation. And the Crown Corporation is actually, managing loot from this criminal operation that has been expanding and monopolizing all around the world. and the Crown Corporation is running all this and has by now pretty much as good as endless money, because they're also owning the banks and their print money. And then what this Crown Corporation does is it sets up little companies, little sub-corporations, labels them differently, like MI6, MI5, the Home Office, you know, the police, the NHS, blah, 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 blah. And then they get, you know, little minion babies born, and minion babies grow up like me and think, oh, that's the police, that's the school, that's the NHS. And it's like, no, it's the Crown Corporation. It's this one big architecture. And if this hypothesis were true, what would possibly be the evidence for that? Well, I would say every corporation has branding for internal recognition purposes. And what if the satanic pentagram is actually the brand of the Crown Corporation, along with other brands like the All-Seeing Eye? Because I can prove to you every single police station has the satanic pentagram, including the one with the fentanyl story.
They do, and the sheriff's departments also have the pentagram. And by the way, Katherine, there's also proof in Agenda 21, because that's where it all comes down. This is, you know, this is the manifestation of the Crown Corporation. It's the UN agenda. And I actually want to share screens. I've been looking up an article that I wrote in 2015, and I'll just point to what's happened in our towns and cities today. Let me just share screens over here.
While you're doing that, Romola, let me just share quickly that I was told by the Domestic Violence Agency in Dayton, Ohio, that because so many former military veterans are now on the police forces, it's hard to get them to investigate one another.
You know, that is, I've always thought that that was a good place for people leaving the military to go, because they've had incredible experience, incredible training. But with their oath as an American soldier to go out and protect the American citizens, how can they possibly come back and allow some of their own people to abuse the citizens that they were trained to protect? This is just, I mean, I don't doubt exactly that's going on, but my gosh, this is such an incredible betrayal. And this is where you get into calling them oath breakers, not oath keepers.
Right. And I think what's really happening is American police, and even the military veterans that you're talking about who are in the American police, are now being overseen, supervised, and dominated by global police, aka UN police. And that is via this particular memorandum that the Department of Justice put out. You know, this was in 2015. It was in September 2015. And what they talked about was, here's the actual press release: the launch of the Strong Cities Network to strengthen community resilience against violent extremism. And let me show you that. This is from the Department of Justice. This is Monday, September 28, 2015. And you can read the whole thing. And what they're talking about is how there's a need to create a network of strong cities, and the whole necessity to combat violent extremism. Now, they don't really say what this violent extremism is exactly, but it's to challenge violent extremism in all of its forms and manifestations in their local contexts. Okay, it's called the Strong.
It's those people who figure out that they're having their country taken from them and are starting to stand up. That's exactly what it is, because the Nazis did the very same thing in 1930s Germany when they changed the German constitution to allow them to oppress and murder certain German citizens. That's exactly what it is. It's in preparation for people figuring out they're being taken over and subverted and enslaved.
Exactly. And that's the cover operation that they are using over here. This whole countering violent extremism thing. Come on, Americans are not violent and not extremists at all, across the board, you know. But Americans, like every other nation on the world, can be revved up, can be bribed, can, you know, run and do Antifa protests, Black Matter lives protests, etc. No, what am I saying? Black Lives Matter protests, etc. People can be revved up. People can be revved up to run riots. People can be revved up to act out, They can be paid to be actors. And this comes down to the whole story of surveillance role players, which we've been talking about. One of the things I've been doing lately is looking up surveillance role players online, and hello, there are many defense companies that are actually advertising for these. And why are defense companies advertising for these? Why is General Dynamics and BAE Systems advertising for these? And other companies like Human Domain Solutions that are looking for surveillance role players to assist in military drills on military bases, to clean up after a major disaster. This is something upcoming, an exercise drill that's upcoming in the next week. So why are these drills being rolled out? Why are these surveillance role players being hired? Sometimes at very high rates indeed, $115 an hour. What is going on? What is going on is this plan to run these crisis operations continuously, to create systems, scenarios of crisis and situations of crisis in our communities, to create situations of terror. That is what is going on, because it's all part of, as you said, Karen, this whole attempt to create, again, it comes down to that Delphi principle, right? Problem, reaction, solution. Create the problem, present the reaction, and then present the solution. Imagine the reaction and present the solution. So it's sort of revving up people and communities. So this whole thing about the violent extremism now is talking about how cities across the world are connecting, and how this is putting police that are UN police to work with local police in cities. And, I recommend that people check out this particular post over here, because Chris Ann Hall, who is very focused on the American Constitution, does a great job spelling out how this is going to be super problematic for America. And this was 2015. So, we're back to mega regions, UN takeover of America, dividing up America, and so on and so forth.
In all this, we still, including me included, we're still talking about this, and I think it's a false concept it's a fallacy that I slip into. We're still talking about the takeover of America. America has been taken over in the 15th century. The Crown Corporation owned it wholesale. Everything that happened after that were just, and I think Katherine often makes this point, when they dissolved slavery, they only dissolved it, first of all, on the surface, and second of all, the only reason they altered slavery is because they realized they can get much more money off people if they just change the mode of asset stripping. That's the only reason. And who is they? They is the organized crime network that organizes it under the umbrella of the Crown Corporation, I would say. Because if we just run with this hypothesis for now, it all becomes clear. Because when I read this, my first question is, with what right are they doing this? And they're doing it with the right, which is actually backed by the US military, which is owned by the Crown Corporation. They are doing this with the right that they owned US all along. The United States of America Corporation, or the United States Corporation, whatever the hell it's called. And I can prove that to you. If you run with this hypothesis, their branding says so. You have 50 Crown Corporation satanic pentagrams on your flag because you're wholesale owned by the Crown Corporation. The same, by the way, with the Soviet Union. As soon as, Lenin was here in Switzerland, in Zurich, actually, when Lenin was groomed and set up by the Vatican crime cartel, which this is the Vatican Bank, Switzerland is the Vatican Bank, to actually go to Russia and pull off this revolution, okay? What happened after that is they killed the Russian Tsar, so any sort of ground rights were dissolved. It went over into the possession of this organized crime cartel, as in the Crown Corporation, and then it was actually proven because they put their branding on the flag. And you have the Soviet Union flag with the satanic pentagrams. When this entire thing was done with China, and Mao is an agent of the Crown Corporation as well, or was, when they did that and successfully captured the entirety of China, again, you had the satanic pentagrams put on the flag. It's their branding, it's their logo. So when we see all these police organizations with the satanic pentagram, what we have to think is, oh, These are private corporations owned by the Crown Corporation. In other words, owned by by organized crime. And the Crown Corporation has different brandings and different logos, you know, to do with the things that they obsess about, like snakes. There's, for example, Alfa Romeo, the car maker, with snakes and the, you know, the Templar cross, you know, red and white, and so on and so on. And I think what we should do is we should realize, hang on, this global corporation, the Crown Corporation now owns pretty much all the car manufacturers. It owns all the police stations. It for sure owns all the secret services. It pretty much owns governments. It owns the flags, you know. And then it also means it owns all the weapons, all the weapon manufacturers as well. Okay. And what it does is, because the Crown Corporations, or the Crown agents, the servants of the Crown Corporation agents, they know that they're human beings and they're up against other human beings who are not in the Crown Corporation. And those are the people the Crown Corporation tries to farm and to asset strip. Now, when these people operate amongst other people who could kill them if they actually found out what's happening, well, they have to put on a show. They have to kind of hide it. And we have this gangster talk of cartel signaling. We have covert signaling, you know, double speak and everything. But as soon as you make this assumption, suddenly the entire world becomes clear. We can actually combine all the different testimonies. We understand why Chief Potts is not just not helping Millicent. He's actively jeering about her death. And then, yeah, then we go and get at your daughter. Yeah, well, nice, you know, criminal. That suddenly makes sense because he's working for organized crime. It suddenly makes sense why Ashton Underline did nothing, lied, falsified documents, and then MI5 put out a fake video claiming that Inspector Miskell actually existed, even though the video was really rubbish and you know, obviously fake, and so on. It is the Crown Corporation just larking about. They are all connected, you know. But then also we can, with one assumption, explain why, for example, Dr. Lorraine Murray reported that these antenna systems that are used to attack people are actually inside the cars. And I think it was her who said that they are, you know, they found the actual diagrams and the plans, the antenna systems inside the cars that are serially being manufactured. So in other words, you know, the Internet of Things will be, for example, this integrated weapon system that any car on the road can also, without the active acquiescence of the driver, machine gun you in the street with these pulsed energy projectile systems. So if we don't make this assumption that it's all already interconnected, it makes no sense. But as soon as we accept that, hang on, the Crown Corporation owned America from the 14th century, it suddenly all made sense. And what we thought was actually history and independence was just a local little, well, how to put it? It was a promotional drive by the Crown Corporation. Hey, love us. You know, it's like Mexican weeks at McDonald's. Yay, we are now appealing to all the people who love Mexican food. And, you know, everything that we saw was, for example, the French Revolution was just branding. It was a promotional week or months of the Crown Corporation, which was actually what it was in real fact doing, is asset stripping, for example, in the French Revolution, the French king, you know, and killing him, and a bunch of others who disagreed.
And it's also like the British Empire, you know, sort of suddenly rolling up its flag and saying, oh, yeah, we've closed up shop. We're giving India its independence and all these other countries their independence. We're giving America its independence. And, you know, we're not involved anymore, but actually running the show from behind the scenes. And, you know, what it comes down to in the present day, of course, you know, with the rearing up of the ugly head of Agenda 21 is sort of the kind of a more prominent manifestation of that precise agenda that you're talking about. It's an ancient agenda. It's an ancient dominance that's been carried through. And now is, you know, it's almost like what we've come to understand about our parliaments and our Congress. There's a lot of posturing. There's a lot of facade operations in action. There's a lot of, you know, things they say for the camera and things they believe in private and things they're doing in private, etc. It's like that. It's like grand theater that's going on. It's like a farce that's playing out. And part of the farce that's playing out currently is that America has been a free country, and now America is connecting with the UN to create these wonderful programs called Strong Cities Networks and bringing global police into our local police departments. You know, it's part of that facade is what I think is going on. So it's a way of bringing in more materially, concretely, and openly this totalitarian system that they are attempting to roll out. You know, and the more of us begin to see what has happened and what is happening, the more we can protest. Because as Karen started this conversation with, you know, if we had real police working for us in our communities, you know, they would be approachable, they would be accessible. We would not be living in a police state whereby the police now think that they own all of us and they can simply walk into our communities, make us do things, barge down, you know, barge into our areas, whack the, you know, knock on doors, enter people's houses and start shooting. There are so many cases like this. People have been killed by police knocking on doors with guns, demanding that somebody inside do something, you know, even though that person is sitting there unarmed, and then shooting that person, shooting the dog, shooting the 9-year-old girl in the face, things like that. Incredible. I think recently on Twitter, I posted this video, somebody had sent it around, Philadelphia police tasering a young black man, making him sit on the pavement. I don't know if you all saw that, you know, it's in my Twitter feed. You saw it. Yeah. It's horrendous, right? I mean, the guy
makes no sense.
Unarmed, quiet, calm, compliant, sitting quietly, and then police yelling from all directions, put your arms on your legs, spread your legs, do this, do that. And he's struggling to comply with 300 different directions, including from women, police women behaving in this ghastly fashion. Made me ill listening to that, you know? And then this poor guy's doing whatever he's asked. The cop moves behind him, almost as if positioning himself for the perfect shot. And you have to ask yourself, what is going on here? You know, what is going on here? Is this a satanic ritual? Is this directed energy weapons testing? What is going on here? He positioned himself and he shot the guy in the spine with a taser. And, you know, tasers are deadly weapons. I don't care what you say. If you look it up, if you look up and you look at what happens when people are tasered, I think there is a huge movement, by the way, among human rights activists to stop the use of tasers.
There are people who have been killed.
And people are being killed.
And my point would be, if you give a cop a toy, he wants to use it. And that's why the so-called non-lethal weapons are a horrific danger. Because we know from Paul David Galbotz, who's a military security specialist who guarded facilities where directed energy weapons were tested, that non-lethal weapons were never designed to be non-lethal, you know. They were designed to be lethal.
They wouldn't be called weapons, right? I mean, hello, it's like the clues in the name, right?
Yeah. Good point. They are weapons. And they, you know, non-lethal was a very cunning, very clever, very sly configuration of language to project the image of, you know, non-violent. Sorry, non-lethal is not non-violent.
Yeah, I think the best way to call them is to call them cancer weapons and brain mutilation weapons. Because that's what they are.
They're also assault weapons. They are assault weapons. Tasers, in fact, are assault weapons. You know, they assault people. So this guy being hit with a taser rolls over in agony. And then when he's striving to recover, they give him another set of instructions and say, lie flat on your stomach, spread your arms out like an aeroplane. Our friendly police in Philadelphia.
After all your muscles have just contracted.
Yeah, well, you know what? One of the things I would like to say, you were asking, what is this, a satanic ritual? I'll tell you what this is. This is sadistic porn. This is sadistic porn. People actually love watching this. It's actually, it arouses them and it gives them a thrill.
That's what there are sadists out there, and that's another issue.
There's no sense to this, you know. And the other thing is, it gets back to, and this is why I'm not letting go this case. It goes back to the entire, you know, brutal assaults against Ray McGovern on the Intelligence Committee thingy in May, you know, in Washington. What we saw there, those were not police officers. Those were members of a criminal network. And I want to say all the people who acquiesced, as in the entire bloody panel, including Bloody Gina, right, to this entire thing, they are all members of a criminal network, some more thuggish and more overt than others, but they're all members of a criminal network. And this is really as bad as this is. As soon as you make this assumption and you realize how far you've come, everybody, including me, We watched a violent crime live on television. Okay, so who are these people? And it turns out Capitol Police is a private corporation owned by, guess what? The private corporation that owns Washington, D.C., District of Columbia, extraterritorial private territory, which is identical to the people who would own the City of London extraterritorial, area, which is the Crown Corporation. So we saw a bunch of Crown Corporation as an organized criminals assault Ray McGovern, an American on American soil. And that's the moment when America has to say any corporation whose mission or statutes or actual behavior contradicts the law of the land needs to be dissolved. And I'm making a big thing out of this because already what happened to Ray there, if you analyze it correctly, is already enough to dissolve the entire Crown Corporation. And you guys have no understanding, not even a clue what that means. It means you have the right within America to dissolve this entire architecture that was placed onto you, that includes Congress, because that's Washington, D.C., right? It includes the entire government, because that sits in Washington, D.C., and get rid of all that, and including most of the states. I think all of the states, in fact. They are owned by a private corporation. And you can get rid of that. You just need evidence to prove that it's hostile to Americans and hostile to the principles that the Americans chose to govern themselves with, as in the Constitution. And what happened, and it was broadcast all around the world. I saw it. And that's already enough evidence to dissolve the Crown Corporation, people. That's what you should be talking about on Independence Day. How do you dissolve the Crown Corporation?
That's pretty brilliant, Katherine, and maybe that's something we can explore. How do you dissolve a corporation, which, by the way, has enormous amounts of power, has enormous amounts of wealth and weaponry, and is using that weaponry against people? Clearly it used its weaponry publicly against Ray McGovern that day, but it's using its weaponry through the police departments in our communities. Every day. So the question becomes, how do you do it? And by the way, I'd like to bring up another case over here. And this is something that Seven brought to my attention. It's a friend of hers, a friend that we all know, by the way, Michael Moore, or Mel, who sent us that wonderful jewelry, the protective jewelry, if you remember. And his jewelry, by the way, has helped me a great deal because I've been using it as a kind of it's a crown, and I've used it, actually it's a crown, interestingly enough, but I used it as a kind of, headband. And it's made of copper coils, and it's really helped when I've been hit in the head with microwave pulse weapons to stop the migraines, because it's been taking the shots being made of copper and apparently using Tesla technology or whatever. In any case, it worked for me. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but it worked. Well, Mel, clearly community activist, wonderful human rights activist, great heart, doing great things for us on this team. He and his brother and his friend were sitting one night in one of their flats, having a drink, knock on the door, police show up, and the police demand to come in. And they say, we got a call. There was disturbance over here. Well, guess what happened? One of the people inside the house said, no, you can't come in. You need a warrant. You can't come in. And then what happened was they called for backup. Apparently there were 15 police vans sent in. They barged in, they overpowered these three men, okay? They sprayed them with some ghastly gas, which led to them being hospitalized. And how can this happen? For no reason, police barging in and assaulting normal, innocent, regular people just living their lives,
This is exactly what I mean, because it wasn't police. Why do we even say that a group of thugs pulling up in those thug vans, an actual gang, a gang of organized criminals doing a hit on a family? Why do we even use the police word? And it's just because they have that printed on the van and they come with, 50 cents plastic badges from China. They are not police, people. Understand this. They are not your police. They are organized criminals. And then when we're asking, why is it that organized criminals barged into a flat and assaulted people? Well, I would say because they're making a lot of money one way or another.
What it does is it sends a message to the community to not call the police.
Exactly.
Even when you have a legitimate cause, don't call them. I'm going to tell you, the biggest surprise of my life was I was sitting in a room one night with a medical doctor who seemingly was having some laryngitis. And our friend said, "Winston, should we call the doctor?" He said, "No, doctor, no, doctor." So you see, I mean, it's almost the same. We don't dare call the people who are supposed to protect us because they're going to bully us and abuse us. And I don't hear that much about it here now in Colombia, but I'm going to tell you, there was an epidemic of domestic violence murders that was going on. And it was so bad that the editor of the local newspaper, when I was looking into the murder of Dr. Basil, he did the research for me himself. And when I went in to pick up my information, he said, "They've let it happen again." He was so distressed and distraught because we're not talking about a man shooting just a woman, but a man shooting a woman and her 2 daughters. You see what I'm saying? There were multiple murders happening around here, and none of them, I mean, at that point, the murderers were killing themselves as well. But I want to know, have you all noticed that the serial murders now are not killing themselves? Have you all noticed that?
Yeah,
They used to always kill themselves. That's not happening anymore.
And you know what? I think it's safe to assume, pretty much, you know, with second order corrections later, it's safe to assume that all these killings that were reported in the press, very important because there are many killings that are not reported in the press, those which were really high profile and reported in the press, where the people turned the gun on themselves. This is Delta programming. This is mind control programming. And what it actually was is, this is why the police is not investigating, because they are doing it. I think they were testing back in the day in Tennessee or in Colombia, the mind control technology, and they were setting off the previously programmed mind control slaves that are implanted in the city everywhere. I think this is what we were watching.
You may be right, because I know a young woman now who told us the story about her dad, who was a World War II veteran. And that was the beginning of the mind control programming testing. She said after he was discharged, every night at the same time, she said he would go out in the backyard. Now, I don't remember if he took a gun with him every time, or maybe they were not aware, but she said every night at the same time, he would go out in the backyard. And it was almost, the way he would get up was so mechanical, like he was probably working out a command that had been, you know, post-hypnotic suggestion possibly, until one night he got up, he went out into the backyard, and he committed suicide.
I think, to me, that sounds like people validating that technology. So people practicing every single night, you know, certain computer algorithms to execute, or certain, you know, commands to execute, and then they do it. And I think the question is, why would he have to do it over and over if the test is successful over and over? And I would say because they're training up an army of people how to do it, you know, to then do it to other people. And actually, this is very interesting that you raised the world wars, because when we realized that the world wars were entirely manufactured and staged by the Vatican crime cartel, by the Masonic crime cartel. And this is evidenced by the fact that Churchill, many people don't know, you know, the victory sign, it's called either the Templar V, according to Sean Ross. For me, it's the double pillars of Freemasonry. But either way, it is the crime cartel recognition sign. Now, for example, I wanted to mention a protest in Poland when the Supreme Court judges were kicked out. They are doing this. They think it's the peace sign. It's not the peace sign. And the way the CIA's New York Times reports it is that the top image on the New York Times shows these fingers and the red and white, with a red and white glove, the Swiss colors, the Templar colors. They're showing the Templar V with the Templar colors. Whoa, you know? So you can see the Crown Corporation in action. But my point is, if we go back to the Second World War and we say it was entirely staged and manufactured by the crime cartel, then we know that mind control is based on trauma. How much trauma did these soldiers have in the Second World War? If you really controlled the entire war, you controlled both sides, and you could control it down to the minutiae, which they could, you could pick out certain people, put them through this. You can even say who's gonna, die the next day. You could control it more or less, within parameters, but you could take entire regiments and put them through basically mind control through trauma-based mind control programming. So is that any surprise that these people would go back home and behave really strangely as if they had been brainwashed? And then let's also combine it with this really important evidence that Dr. Ronnie Kilder brought to us, which is that the very first brain chips ever to be implanted in a person were in the 19th century. They were in 1874 in Ohio. 18, not 1974. She is on the record on YouTube in a talk that I will bring up. So if the very first brain chips, experimental brain chips, were implanted in 1874, by the time we get to 1914, that's 40 years of development. By the time we get to the Second World War, that's 60 years of development,
And I think this issue of trauma-based mind control is also very important, Katherine, to keep in mind, because if you look at all of these directed energy weapons testing programs, they are actually biobehavioral research testing contracts. Why would you need to test or look at the biological effects and the behavioral effects at the same time when you are hitting somebody with a directed energy weapon? And why would you need to subject the test subject to constant acoustic stimuli, constant stress stimuli all the time, nonstop? So everybody who is reporting, as being a reporting victim of these directed energy weapons attacks are also reporting nonstop organized stalking, nonstop organized monitoring, surveillance, nonstop COINTELPRO on the streets, helicopter stalking, airplane stalking, all this nonsense. These are stress stimuli. These are stress assaults. When you go out, huge noise barrage, noise harassment, attacking the nervous system, putting the person into a state of trauma constantly, a state of stress constantly, even working on your computer, your computer is attacked, your phone is attacked. All of this is designed to make you frustrated, annoyed, stressed, traumatized. Why on earth would somebody, the US Air Force working through General Dynamics in Quincy, Massachusetts, why on earth would they need to subject me to nonstop stress when they're attacking me with these weapons, which they have no right to be doing, in which they're going to be sued for, $500 million for very shortly. But why are they doing that? Why is the stress so important? And I think it's because it all picks on these mind control operations. There's a straight line from the CIA, which actually goes back to the Nazis and Mengele, and those concentration camps. They were studying mind control way back then. They were studying behavioral control way back then. They had no limits. They had no limits in terms of how they attacked and assaulted people in those camps and used them as experimental test subjects. That thinking has come down all the way through the CIA, right into the military, has entered the Air Force, and is now being played out in our communities with these weapons testing, so-called weapons testing programs.
Absolutely, Romola. I can't tell you how many times I have heard the voice of Randall Webster say to me, I've got to keep you stressed. I've got to keep you stressed. I mean, over and over and over. And if I sit just to relax, even on the couch, if it's not his voice that I'm hearing, it's some attack on my body, specific parts of my body, by the way, to make me tense up. I'm trying to remember who it was that told me about that stress response. I had two psychologists. One of them was in the state of Massachusetts that I had contacted back in 2007. And then I contacted another one in West Tennessee, in Memphis, in 2011, just trying to get some psychological counseling for myself, ways to degrade the severity of the trauma that I'd been forced to endure. And both of them told me, we can't begin to work with you until the situation has ceased. So now imagine being traumatized every day for 16 years or for 22 years and still knowing that you can't begin to recover until the trauma has been made to stop. They know they've got a whole nation of traumatized people. The people in our communities that are watching us be traumatized are also themselves being traumatized and made to fear. I was told this morning by in the voice of the person that I have named over and over and over, that he knows he had no clearance to do many of these things to me, but he wanted to because he wanted to make the people afraid of him. And so that's aided and abetted by the police department, who will not even do the things that are necessary to secure safety, not just for me, but for a community or a county.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. And this trauma is something that they are using, as Randy Webster is saying to you, and as everybody else who's being hit with these weapons is experiencing today. This trauma has become an essential part of their program. They have decided it's perfectly okay to traumatize people in order to get into their brains, map their neural networks, enter their neural networks, because, you know, brain modification and behavior modification is so important, and they can't do it without traumatizing you. This, by the way, was the subject of a whole bunch of posts that Dr. Robert Duncan recently made on Facebook, which someone sent on to me, which I haven't yet put out there, but which I hope to put out there shortly, because he spells out the whole program, exactly what they're doing, you know, and trauma is indeed a part of it. Now, remember that Dr. Robert Duncan is, you know, a whistleblower. He's from the DOD and from the CIA. He worked on these projects. He knows how they worked. So it blows my mind that there are people in the military, there are people in the CIA today in 2018 who've got the gall, who've got the temerity, who've got the absolute balls, you know, to actually roll out programs that involve trauma, that involve torture, and actually go and take the next step of running these programs experimentally. So-called experimentally, as we know, and as we've talked about, Katherine, this is more than experimental at this point. It seems highly operational. It seems connected to domestic pacification and takeover of societies. But to roll those programs out on paper as experiments, as contracts, as research projects, we're talking about scientists, we're talking about physicists, we're talking about biologists, psychologists, psychiatrists, electrical engineers, all working together, radio engineers, neuroscientists, all working together in these multidisciplinary cross-genre projects, you know, that are all involved now in the use and creation of these ghastly anti-personnel weapons that are being used to destroy people's brains. And then calling them non-lethal weapons, calling them anti-personnel weapons, trying to cover it up with some friendly language. You know, you can never ultimately cover it up fully, of course, but wrap it up nicely and then roll out these federal contracts, get billions of dollars for them. This is what's going on, you know, in the country today. So this is so extreme, but they are actually openly conducting experiments which involve trauma.
I would say that the one thing I would like to say that this is 100% true. And now I'm really interested in basically thinking what the hell to do about it and how to resolve it. And when I started thinking about it, I realized how absolutely vast this problem is, because these people are everywhere. I now have evidence that the program that's being rolled out in every single US state is identical to the program being rolled out in the UK, in Germany, in Switzerland, Spain, Romania, Italy, Belgium, Netherlands. I think these are the countries I've been to where I've seen this program in action. And it's always the same. It's the distributed gang stalking, directed energy weapon attacks, neurotech attacks, and so on. And then when we're thinking about, sorry, I just get feedback. There's some hissing sound, I think, from one of the microphones. But anyway, so when we're thinking about how to resolve it, we run into the problem that the police do not help us. The hospitals do not help us, but actually are assaulting us, implanting us, doing organ harvesting, you know, killing us. And then the courts also are not really helping us. And when we want to, and also most importantly, the outfits who are tasked with supposedly fighting terrorism are perpetrating this. So what we're faced with is actually a global takeover, a global coup d'etat by organized crime. But this global coup d'etat by organized crime did not happen with 9/11. It did not happen in the 21st century. this coup d'etat happened over hundreds of years, over the last over 2,000 years. Okay, so what we have now is, thanks to the internet, for the very first time in human history, we have a global realization of this coup d'etat that happened over thousands of years. Okay, and also this entire coup d'etat was, you know, spreading slowly and became ever more successful. And it became super successful in the 20th century with the entire industrialization of the war machinery. This is how the Crown Corporation could really expand its entire power. That's why China was taken over in the 20th century, Russia was taken over, you know, Africa was already being asset stripped earlier and then taken over again. And just briefly, while we're on this topic, I would like to give this as an exercise to everybody who disbelieves me. And I invite you all to go look up all the maps of the entire world and highlight every single map that has Crown Corporation branding. And the Crown Corporation brands, I can tell you, are symbols of the pentagram, for example, here, are symbols of the sun, because it goes back to sun worship, for example, here, and also Crown Corporation colors. You can basically find out who the Crown Corporation is by finding the two flags on this map, which are square. Actually, here on this diagram, they're shown wrong, but there are only two flags in the world that are square, actually indicating the only two sovereign nations on the planet, both of which are owned by the Crown Corporation or the Vatican cartel. Number one is obviously the Vatican. The Vatican flag is square, not as it's shown here, it's actually square. And the other one that's square is Switzerland. Now, the Vatican is the little HQ of the, outfit there, but it's too freaking tiny to actually run a world power. But Switzerland is pretty big, and it's the most fortified area on planet Earth, probably short of the Himalayas, you know. So these two flags are square, so I can tell you that the Crown Corporation colors are red and white and yellow and white. Now, if you go through this exercise and you highlight every single flag that either has a satanic pentagram, like here, like on the US flag, which I can't see right now, or you look at the Swiss colors, has the Swiss cross like here and here, you know, and you go through absolutely everything, this pretty much is the entire world. And everything that doesn't fit the pattern, you know, you can think about what exactly that means. Are they not captured? Or is that some sort of different symbolism? But you can prove to yourself that with this hypothesis, you can already explain pretty much all the flags in the world. You can explain Canada, which is a bit like Switzerland, isn't it? It's just that they stuck a leaf on, you know, which kind of looks like a crown, does it not? With like three peaks, like almost indicating three crowns. What pure coincidence, you know, out of all the flora in Canada, you pick something that looks like a crown, and so on and so on. Here, when it's blue and white, you still have Switzerland, the Swiss square cross in there, you know. So that's Greece for you. And then suddenly you understand why Greece is being asset stripped, you know, by the Crown Corporation. So that's just an aside, but just to complete the picture, because today we were talking about the police. And for example, we started off with Karen mentioning this horrific case about the police also shooting children, and they don't really care about children either. And before the show, we spoke about another really important aspect that needs to be factored in, which is that we see a lot of young people being trained up for gang stalking and direct energy weapon assaults, you know. So when you have children being trained as spies and children being trained as a military force with actual military weapons, what you have is child soldiers. Child soldiers are actually outlawed, I think, according to the UN Charter. Okay, but they don't care, because the UN Charter is just for the muggles, you know, who are not part of the Crown Corporation. But also the spying services are recruiting children from the youngest years. I showed a while back, if you look up the Bundesnachrichtendienst, German intelligence headquarters, you actually see a boarding school on the side of the BND. What does a boarding school have to do with the BND? Unless, of course, they're training child soldiers, child super spies, and they are putting technology into children. They're using trauma-based mind control on children, and they're training them up to be basically a breed of super spy. super loyal to one, you know, employer, one set of handlers, and so on and so on. But also, I think when you're starting to put in brain chips, you need to put them into babies, and then the brain kind of grows around that, integrates, and then you have basically people who can be electromagnetically controlled. I think this is why the BND has a boarding school. But I would like to draw attention, because it's super important. It has to do with policing, which is why I would like to raise it now. Again, it might seem extremely esoteric to some people who don't understand the workings of the Crown Corporation, but I assure you it is not. This is hardcore evidence that I think also should be quoted in court. So I would like to share my screen, and I would like to draw your attention to certain bits of evidence, which is, I would like to show you films that I've mentioned. I am referring to, damn, I actually can't see my window, because the share screen button comes out and obscures the tabs. So I would like to refer you to two film series. It's called A Series of Unfortunate Events. There was the TV series in 2017 and A Series of Unfortunate Events on the film in 2004. So there's 13 years between the two, okay? Now this is a child's movie, and it is hardcore evidence, okay? And I'll explain to you why. Sorry, I'm not promoting a particular streaming service here, but here I can actually show you the images. So the film, which came out first in 2004, is called Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events. And it follows the story of 3 children, the Baudelaire children, who are heirs to an incredible fortune. This is actually really relevant to what MI6 is doing, by the way. But anyway, so these children are stand to inherit an incredible fortune, and their family home was burned down and their parents died, which is why they're orphans. And you get this criminal with a black and white pinstripe suit, like a banker, like a mason, black and white, who basically sports the all-seeing eye symbolism absolutely everywhere, following them around and trying to get their fortune. Now, when you look at this film, the first time I analyzed the film, I actually thought, oh my goodness, what they're playing out there is exactly what the Crown Corporation did, because the Crown Corporation takes all the billionaires and asset strips them. They take all the rich people, and at some point in a never-ending churn, just asset strips them. Okay, and the film that came out first is actually amazing, because they spell out how the crime cartel is stealing the assets from around the world. Also, later on in the film, it turns out, you know, spoiler alert, that the house of the parents was burnt down using a lens, and using basically by directing sunlight, as in directing energy at the home and burning it down. The house was burnt down by directed energy weapon, okay? So when I saw this, I thought, oh my goodness, that's the cartel, okay, speaking to us. But yet the cartel is pretty much uncovering, it shows itself as the baddie and uncovers its workings. I just couldn't believe it. It was like a documentary for children about everything that's wrong in the world. Also, very important, the asset stripping of rich families is something that MI6 is known to do. For example, in the case of Gerald Carroll. Gerald Carroll went from being a billionaire to owning pretty much nothing, because MI6 asset stripped them by creating fraudulent companies, identical in name, I think up to a spelling mistake, to his companies, and gradually transferring assets, you know, using companies house fraud in the UK over a period of time. This happened in the 90s. So this is pretty much exactly what's described here. Now, I want all the investigators to watch
Katherine, Katherine, I'm sorry, but we're having to look at that flashing over and over and over, and there could be subliminals in there. I would really not like to do that.
Okay, sorry. I'm very, very sorry. There's no subliminals here. This is just, I'm just going to freeze it. I'm going to switch away from here. But one of the things I really would like us all to do, okay, here is when you watch this, this is what's being pumped into the brains of children. So it's very important that very good that you bring up subliminals, Millicent, because that's exactly what they're doing here, okay? Now, I want pretty much everybody who wants to investigate pedophilia and the organized crime cartel to watch these films, please, because they have evidence in them. So number one is the film, but then 13 years later, they came out with a series, and this is actually a Netflix series. So Netflix is owned by the crime cartel, Now, what came out in this series, again, being pumped into the brains of children, is again the Baudelaire children, but every single episode in these 2 seasons talk about something that the secret services and the police actually do. Okay, here they talk about not just directed energy weapons. They also, if you go to the episodes, there's an episode, I think yes, I think it's here in season 1, which is, it's about the miserable mill part here, episode 7 and 8, where they talk about mind control. They talk about the boy being put under mind control and being triggered with a code word that I think he, if I remember correctly, he hears over the telephone or he hears being spoken to him. So we have a child TV program actually playing out mind control here. But one of the things that's also shown in this television, and it's meant to appear extremely cool, there's a confusion in the kids TV show because it shows spies, but it shows a group of some nebulous organization that has this all-seeing eye symbol, and it portrays them as good spies who are just fighting, you know, they're trying to help the children, they are fighting for good in the world, they appear in disguise and they're just helping all the time. And then, you know, this really evil guy who's just shown over and over, right, Count Olaf, he just takes over the all-seeing eye secret organization and turns it bad. Now, this is exactly the subliminal brainwash of the children, because what the cartel is going to do next, now that we are uncovering that the spy organizations are all criminals, they're going to say, oh yes, but it was just taken over by bad guys. No, it was set up by bad guys. It was set up by the Crown Corporation. So if you watch these kid episodes, you will see the all-seeing eye being flashed all throughout the series, and that is the symbol of the Crown Corporation. But you will have so much more in these series, because in one episode, Larry, the waiter, says to the children, he's actually a spy. And then the children ask him about all the spy secret codes and so on. And Larry says to the children, your parents should have taught you this. So what this children's TV show actually reveals is that their entire spy families, and I think they are now pervading our society everywhere, where the knowledge about the secret code and the secret language is passed on to the children, and the children are being indoctrinated into the spying world from the youngest age. Now, the reason why this is super important is because what you see on Netflix is like a cutesy kind of little preparation. But what you can find on YouTube is actually the real thing, because there was one guy who pointed out that on YouTube, he found a set of animated TV cartoons of children, and they were all to do. And he pointed out, isn't it strange? There are 4 companies, supposedly different manufacturers, making cartoons. And every single one of the cartoons has exactly the same scenes in it. One of them is the child, one of the children in the cartoon getting an axe into his head and blood gushing. The other one is a cemetery scene. The other one is a scene in a dentist chair with horrific injuries to a child, and so on. And these were cartoons for children, I would say, younger than 4 or 5. And he was asking, how on earth are these sick cartoons appearing on YouTube? And why does have different cartoons all the same 6 scenes? And I would say, because it's trauma-based mind control reinforcement. The parents, the families that are in these secret services are expected to indoctrinate their children and teach them the spying code, the hand signs, the gang stalking symbolism, the code words, and so on. But they're also obliged to put their children into MKUltra programmings. Now, when these children are put into programmings, we know from whistleblowers that they're taken, for example, to hospitals or military bases and kept in cages. Okay, I have to dig out, but I've got an entire series of whistleblowers saying that. And what happens is these children are put into a hospital either for 10 days, and usually it's something more than a week, 10 days sometimes even for a month, and then they're being traumatized. But then the traumatization has to be refreshed repeatedly. And I think these cartoons are exactly that. So what we're watching now on YouTube is MKUltra Live. Now, the reason why this is super important to understand, and why I think everybody should take the time to watch these kid programs, is because what we're seeing there is the Crown Corporation's global machinery. It's recruiting Japanese children, British, German children, American children, African children, absolutely everywhere around the world, and puts them through exactly the same wash cycle. okay? But these people would then be entering the police force, because we also know that it's these Masonic families who get all the jobs in the police and the secret services. When they become royal archmasons, they, you know, well, they become members of the secret services and the Masons at the same time. And then as they approach by the level that they're royal arch Freemasons, they are high up in the secret services. And I think they're expected to murder people, you know. And
yeah, it's preparing them to brutalize others, you know, and think nothing of it. It's preparing them for a lifetime of, you know, erasure of compassion, empathy, and all things that we call human. Before you go on to your solutions, though, Katherine, I'd like to jump in with Gerald Sosby's latest article, which I think is brilliant because it describes the problem and it describes what's going on. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to let you know that.
I think we should skip to Gerald's statement, because basically, sorry to hijack this and talk so long, but I want people to also pick up all these other things that might seem offbeat because they're part of the investigation. In real terms, when the Crown Corporation gets into families and the heads of children, it does it through TV, through music videos, through kids programs, and so on. So what we're actually watching here when we're watching these the child TV programs is we can analyze exactly what's being done to the children, and we can predict how they're going to behave and what brainwash they have been put through. By the way, Harry Potter is also part of this brainwash.
Oh, absolutely. Harry Potter has totally taken over, you know, and that actually prepares kids to welcome that whole horror genre, you know, and under the umbrella of magic and fantasy, there's also the preparation of their minds to welcome scenes of murder and extreme horror, you know, and I see that playing out. I've got a 13-year-old who's been steeped into the Harry Potter culture from very young, and I see what she and her friends are reading and watching, and how blasé they've become about things like murder, you know. It's totally shocking to me.
I've actually been very appalled at America's funniest videos. I don't know, do either of you, Karen, Ramola, watch that at all?
I used to, haven't in a while.
It is so, to me, it's so sadistic because they show children hurting themselves and they're laughing.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, it's supposed to be something funny for a child to trip over, say a slide, and fall and start to cry, and they laugh. I'm going, this is not entertainment. This is not a funny video. Maybe I've just gotten so serious because of all of the things I've gone through, but I still recognize when a young person is hurt, it's not funny. It's never funny. But they now have Americans, adult Americans, watching this and laughing for Sunday evening entertainment.
You know what? That is actually, it is the programming of our cultures for sadism in preparation for the genocide. I think that's exactly what it is. Because when you get parents to laugh at the hurting their own children, that's when you have got them ready to laugh about them killing other people, you know? I think this is it, and it's not by coincidence. It's a program, because these things like the what was the American show called? The funniest what?
America's Funniest Videos.
Oh yes, see, we have identical programs in Germany as well, and they came up in the 1990s, and they were really big, and they were being promoted. And one of the things I learned is that everything that was being promoted on television, well, as the name says, as Dr. Paul Marco, you know, pointed out, it's a program. It's called a program. It's a programming. We're being programmed. And on this note, I'm sorry to flash up these images. I'm just going to show you just films, okay, just the titles. But this totally underlines your point, Millicent, because when I just typed into the search The Purge here. And The Purge is actually a film series where they are advocating, or this is kind of the entire idea, is that in America, there's one day in the year where anybody is allowed to kill anybody else by whatever means. And this is actually here on the streaming program. But what is this? What it is this preparation, you know, of the people that they can go out and kill others. So of course, by the time you give them a directed energy weapon and the mobile phone, you know, and you just detach the mobile phone from the directed energy weapon, so they trigger it by just, you know, swiping something or tapping something. They're not even triggering the directed energy weapon itself directly. You have removed the threshold for killing. to like absolute zero.
And look at this, at the symbolism that's beside it. Hush.
Exactly, exactly.
And then broad statement to not tell.
Exactly. And this is just, I mean, this is a cabinet of horrors, and this is just what's on a mainstream streaming program. Look at this. This is a child, you know. And what this is actually the celebration and the fetishization of psychopathy. That's what we have. And it fits in with, for example, the advertising for, sorry, I have to get rid of these images because they make me feel sick. The advertising for Jaguar celebrating a genocide with their It's Good to Be Bad advertising series that I analyzed a while back, you know. So yes, these people are all getting ready, and the Crown Corporation is using it, the fact that it owns the advertising company, it owns Netflix, it owns the movie theaters, to put out whatever they want to put out. And it's for this reason that the program is global and it is absolutely everywhere. And this is why I'm saying, sorry.
And this is what I was going to say, Katherine. I'm just going to share screen and show Gerald's
excellent,
article at this point, because you know what? Check it out. He's talking about the purge. Okay, this is what we are facing all over the world, and he's spelled it out really well, and he actually gives us a wake-up call as to who is doing this. And remember, Gerald is former FBI, and also a military veteran. He was a combat veteran during the Vietnam War. A complex obstacle facing humanity. And this report draws parallels to, I think, the thing that you talked about, Katherine, the popular big screen presentation where humans are murdered in a government purge. Okay? A complex obstacle facing humanity. The purge has begun already globally, and most people are not aware. Here are some parallels with the popular big screen version of the future of society as directed by the intelligence community, which is led by homicidal psychopaths and serial killers in FBI, CIA, MI6, Sûreté, SS, et al. Some of my studies and related topics, he's got a link over there to Academia EDU. And now he spells it out. Government secretly approves of forcing some individuals into suicide, railroading millions into prison and mental wards, and requiring hundreds of thousands to live under constant threat from police and neighbors. These are all of the targeted in the UK, in America, etc. The following groups are at present being slowly exterminated: homeless, accused, certain types of convicted, weak, sick, unemployed, marginalized, undesirables, mentally challenged and emotionally injured, political activists and idealists, and other categories specified by Intel and DoD. Often in our society, do-gooders and FBI police operatives and informants spread false stories against an innocent person who is then hounded and killed by toxic fumes, pumped into the residence by tainted water, by poisonings which induce death by natural causes, by attacks with due ELF, which are invisible and cause many natural deaths and suicides, quote unquote. In all such instances, the unconscionable crimes committed by the FBI and their followers are by far more heinous than any imagined or accused error by the target. Mob rules. The FBI and company also send professional serial killers and psychopaths to provoke a target into violent response. The result is the death or imprisonment of that target. All political targets are implanted with a tracking device so that government assassins may easily attack him or her everywhere on Earth. This beleaguered individual is forced to live under constant surveillance and harassment until life itself loses its natural glow and appeal. The victory for the government is completed when news media hide such atrocities from the public. The wealthy class cheers all social engineering because the burden and suffering mainly includes the underclass, which includes veterans who defended USA on the battlefield and who returned home injured from the service. The purge is in full operation here in USA, is expanding globally, and is so horrific in its application that few believe the gruesome reality that unfolds right under their nose. I see no solution to the dilemma facing mankind because the masses follow their evil leaders and accept their insane directives. He's got another link over there, and he closes, "Peace be with us all, and may Providence guide us out of the horrors put upon us by criminally insane FBI, CIA, and federal magistrate judges across the country."
Exactly true. Now, I know even in when I was in Tallahassee, Florida for a little bit more than a year, where I was targeted for daring to sue NSA because of their theft of my work and promotions to give to another woman who was sleeping her way through the management. I know in the neighborhood in Tallahassee of Greenwood Hills, I found one family that moved in and seemed to be directing the other neighbors. Well, they had two teenagers. Well, they had four actually. They had two teenagers at home and a maybe 12 to 13-year-old and a daughter at college. And the teenagers took part in hitting me with directed energy weapons. So I just would refer to them as mommy and daddy's little psychopaths. So you've got psychopath families that are murdering people, and they're including their children. Imagine what wonderful people these are going to grow up to be, marry, and have their own little psychopath children. I mean, these people moved into a house and rented it just when my targeting began with directed energy weapons. And when I left Florida, oddly enough, they left that house for yet another destination, probably somebody else to murder. And when you look up the house, who owns the house? The Department of Defense owned a house in a neighborhood in Tallahassee, Florida, that has no connection to any military base anywhere near it, and no Department of Defense entity anywhere near it. A Department of Defense single house in a neighborhood. I wonder when that was purchased. How many weeks or months before they targeted me?
Where can you look up who owns the house? Is there a registry in the US for this?
Yes, you can go to, and I forget the name of it. It's a county, it's where you pay taxes and register your property.
I think what all the victims should do now, sorry, I wasn't aware of this. So I think what all of these victims should do now is actually systematically go up and look up who is owning the houses around them that have a direct line of sight, because the directed energy weapons are most of the time coming from those, and then systematically map out who actually owns this. And I'm afraid every target has to do that. Every victim has to do that individually, but we can collate all the information. That is super important.
It is. And actually, many of us have done FOIA requests, Katherine. I certainly have at the DHS with many of the neighbors on the street whom I looked up using that real estate property assessment calculator thingy that you find on the city website. They're supposed to do it. And this is the thing that Mitch was showing us as well. Do you remember, Katherine?
Yes, I thought that was a company registrar. I didn't actually realize that it included ownership of property.
Oh yeah, you can look at the houses in your neighborhood as well, and you can find out who owns them. And usually, it's interesting that Karen's reporting that the DoD is owning a house. I haven't actually seen that when I've looked up these houses on my block. I've actually seen people's names.
Actually, it was a city employee who told me right after the targeting got started against me to look up the property ownership of the house specifically in front of me, and that property was owned by a company. I thought it belonged to the man who moved in it, because they had actually moved a man and his family from California to live in a house that was built specifically in front of mine. His bedroom matched mine to begin it couldn't have been conditioning, to begin the actual torture program.
This is incredible, because Siegfried Thomas here in Switzerland, the court case I'm supporting, he also has evidence of the flat next door being rented by these people who actually don't live at the flat. And he and his wife and other neighbors saw other people go to that flat for murdering and torturing purposes, but also including military personnel going in there. So that would be very interesting, because as I'm sitting here, sorry, you probably could see the mess accumulate around me, because I had to put more and more metal shielding. I'm already sitting in a metal shed, and they're shooting through the walls with these directed energy weapons. So I keep buying new layers of metal and putting them up. It's a shame my microphone muted, but just a moment ago, you could have heard a shot that literally missed my head by an inch and impacted on either side of the metal shed. So it literally I'm being machine gunned through from several properties around. These are contract killers, normal everyday people and old ladies and stuff like that, who are now recruited as contract killers, you know, for the purge, you know, the global Nazi purge. This is incredible. But also I remind people that I think this is exactly right what Karen described. These are psychopath families, you know. Psychopaths have similar traits, so I would expect them to interbreed. You know, I think the number of female psychopaths is lower than male psychopaths, but they do exist. So imagine when these people start breeding, we also know that psychopathy is a trait that's being passed on genetically. There's, for example, the testimony from Jim Fallon. And I also think that what the Second World War and all the other wars around the world achieved is that in every population where the Crown Corporation was warring, what they did is they recruited the psychopaths, the serial killers, and the corrupt scum, and they have exterminated the people of integrity. So what we actually had is a psychopathization of our societies around the world, where the number of psychopaths have been increased, the concentration, by killing off the honest people. And every single time you go through the cycle, you actually get more and more psychopaths and serial killers.
Katherine, I heard
yes, but they're also accomplishing it through lies, you know. They're accomplishing it through lies and through terrorizing people in the neighborhoods. So your neighbors who used to be normal have now become essentially psychopathic, but they have become gang stalkers. They're assisting in these crimes. They're becoming associates with the contract killers, because I think there are contract killers. For instance, in my neighborhood, I can tell you my immediate neighbors have gotten bribed to participate in the destruction. But the neighbors beyond them are the contract killers who are working night and day.
I'm going to say decent people can't be bribed.
Exactly.
I agree with you. I was told it's seed, time, and harvest. You know, that's a term that's in the Bible that Jesus used. But what they said is they plant the seed in the minds of the people, which are the lies. Over time, they then take over our nervous system, so that then we begin to give them the idea that what's being said may be true. In my case, he's also taken over my brainstem and is broadcasting his garbage in my voice into the minds of the people, who think then that I'm thinking trash. And that's impossible. If you look at what I read, if you look at what I listen to, or what I watch on television, I don't get that. So I'm not getting garbage in, garbage out. I'm getting good things in. And when what I'm putting out is good, so then where's the garbage coming from? The garbage is coming from the broadcasting system that belongs to the military, that can be in AM, FM radio, it can be in UHF and VHF for television broadcasting.
Well, we go back to the Bible again. A good tree does not produce bad fruit. A bad tree does not produce good fruit.
Thank you.
Well, you know, I can totally confirm that, because my family and I have been through one wash cycle of the Crown Corporation, when MI6 and the CIA and German intelligence went into communist Romania and asset stripped it. I actually have the testimony set to my face at St. John's College by a retired spy who was operational in communist Romania. So I'm pretty sure MI6 was operational there. So, you know, what they did there is exactly the sort of stuff of entirely taking over our society. And what they did is, it was not by accident called the dictatorship of the proletariat, communism that is, because they took the total proletarians, okay? And for me, a proletarian is not a poor person. For me, a proletarian is the absolutely pathologically corrupt. That's a prole, okay? When you hear people talk about proles. And they took those criminals in our society and they elevated them above everybody else. So above all the academics, above all the doctors who worked really hard to heal people. And then you had this illiterate scum, criminals, and sometimes literate criminals, just oppressing everybody and pressing us down. But one of the things that I can say 100%, and I'm pretty sure the people in East Germany who had the horrific East German system can entirely concur with me, an honest family cannot be bribed. If you were bribed, you were not honest. You were a corrupt bastard. It's quite that simple. My entire family has been persecuted, and I have family members murdered because we did not comply, because we did not snitch, you know? And that's actually, I'm not just saying it, we found the documents in the Securitate's own archives that they were spying on us because they tried to recruit family members and they refused. And they told these people to go and bow their heads, you know?
But, you know, I think what's happened is it's happened so insidiously in America, and it's happened, you know, via the Patriot Act. It's happened with these lies about terrorism. And it's happened also with this illusion of power that the FBI has in neighborhoods, you know, the illusion of uprightness, the illusion of sanctity. So what Gerald is saying really is that they are a very powerful agency. The FBI is a very powerful agency in the minds of most Americans, you know, and the fusion centers are being given credence and credibility by most Americans. So when people come knocking on your door, that is the FBI, and says, you know, we are investigating your neighbor and we want you to keep an eye on the neighbor, and we're going to give you some, you know, we're going to give you some little device or whatever, or we're going to give you an app, or we're going to ask you to do this or do that, and you need to help us in this electronic monitoring. You've got these people keeling over. And so this issue of, you know, if they are decent, they won't do it. I have to question that, because I think they were all decent at a certain point. They were just clueless, and they're still clueless.
Yeah.
They're still clueless. And so I think one of the things we need to do, because we are so aware of what is going on, we need to educate them. And, you know, brings us to the whole flyers situation. We do need to flyer our neighborhoods. But what exactly do you say? And how often do you say it? You know, because I think they need the repetition of message here in order to recognize that the FBI has become a criminal enterprise. The FBI is acting like the mob. The FBI is acting like the mafia. And because the FBI is behaving like the mafia, there are people like me who deserve to live our lives unhampered, in peace, doing the great work that we would otherwise be doing without the neighbors' interference and hitting me and permitting contract killers to come and park in their driveway and direct weapons at me. You know, how do we do it? But clearly something needs to be done. We need solutions. We need to put some flyers out. But when I come to doing flyers, you know, we all tackle this from different angles. And I think Karen's recent flyer is a wonderful one, actually. Maybe I should share screens and show that one, because that's something that I was trying to, that I posted on my website.
And I appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome, Karen. Oh, what it's.
I mean, I think we're trying to get a similar message across, but we're trying different approaches, because not every approach will get to every person. So that's why I think a plethora of various flyers is a good thing. You know, I encourage people to try to write their own flyers. If you don't want to, or you can't, shoot, just come to one of the sites and download it. You're perfectly welcome to. And I've told people in other countries, you know, I'm listing DHS and FBI, but change the wording. If you want to use it verbatim, except for the fact that you're in Austria or you're in the UK, just change the pertinent entities and use it. You know,
and
anything to help.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. We need different kinds of flyers. This is your flyer, and of course, my computer is being frozen as I'm trying to move up and down, but you can see. Basically, it's about the deadly experiments that are going on in the neighborhood. It's about non-consensual directed energy weapons testing and non-consensual experimentation, and under the guise of long-term terrorist watch list investigations. Now, this is what Americans need to wake up to today. Investigations do not go on forever. If these were real intelligence investigations, always imagining that we have some real intelligence agents in our supposed intelligence agencies who actually have basic intelligence, they would need to run an investigation for 3 days, max 10 days, max 2 weeks, max 1 month, not an investigation that goes on for 3 years, 4 years, 10 years, as people are reporting.
15, 22.
15, 22, thank you. So, you know, people need to wake up. Americans need to get their heads out of their fear and compliance centers, wherever they are, and wake the F up and recognize that anybody who tells you that your neighbor is being investigated for years and years and years is a criminal. And that person is using criminal weaponry on your neighbor. So you then ask yourself, do you still want to participate? You still want to take their money? You still want to participate? Do you know what you're handing your power, who you're handing your power over to? And do you know what you are letting in? You are letting in the door to absolute fascism in this community, this neighborhood, this city, this county, the state, and the entire country. You are permitting it, you are supporting it, and you are condoning it. And what is that fascism? I mean, you just have to walk out and look at the skies to see the fascism raining down on us, you know, with the chemtrails. That fascism is total neuromagnetic takeover of the entire human body and the human brain. It is about rolling people into the internet of humans. You know, it's about complete supercomputing, robotic AI takeover. So people do have to wake up and people have to understand that. But that's what I think people don't get. And up till now, there's been no sustained effort, I don't think, to educate people at the level of our neighborhoods, you know. And actually, this is something local police should know as well, which is why Targeted Justice rightly did their flyer, which is the Attention Police and Firemen flyer, you know, which we talked about the last time. Yeah. And I love that it starts by saying flat out, the FBI is lying to you, you know. So it's a very important flyer. Again, I invite people to check out the entire flyer. Print these out and hand them out everywhere in the neighborhood. You know, blitz your neighborhood with these. Hand them to police. So it's kind of a very dark situation, and I know that Gerald closed his story, you know, his article on a very bleak note, saying, you know, I can't quite see the solution, but you know, as humans, as people who are alive, as living beings, I think we are inevitably pointed towards solutions, right? I mean, to live and to breathe is a very positive act in itself. So I think we will find the solutions. And when we find the solutions, we just embark on them, you know, we act on them. And I would like, I think at this particular point in time, we may have to wrap up this show today, but perhaps what we should do next show or an upcoming show is to just focus on the solutions, you know, what we can do and what other people can do and the many things that we can do. Because we are all globally facing a catastrophe of immense proportions. That catastrophe is here, it's in our neighborhoods, it's attacking us. But some people don't know that everybody is under attack. And that's what we need to wake people up to.
Well, I have seen some differences at times. I was in Florida and I put a link to a story about NSA corruption on the back of my car so that my little InfraGard stalkers could look it up very easily while they were sitting behind me in traffic. And I would watch them in my rearview mirror, and a lot of them would roll their eyes like, oh my God, I'm being lied to. And they would at the next intersection turn around and leave. So I had some success in Florida, but what the Fusion Center, the FDLE did was they went further and further into the criminal gangs instead of the routine InfraGard. And I have had some people tell me that handing out the DHS FBI Fusion Center scam flyer that I created has actually helped. But again, they move on from the people who care to the people who don't care. The dregs of society who are doing it for money and couldn't care less about right or wrong. So while there is some, you do have some effect, what I'm disappointed in is that the people who realize they're being lied to don't say a word. They don't say a word. They just basically apparently tell themselves, well, I'm not going to participate. Well, good for you. What does that do for your victim? Not much.
And Karen, yes. How can you tell someone that a specific person has been picked out to be picked on and you not question what that means? That's a specific bullying term, picked on. And how do adults condone anyone being picked out to be picked on.
Well, look at the lie.
That's it exactly. Bullying. That's the term that we should use. You know, this is mass bullying.
It is. And how do you, as a law enforcement person, how do you come to a neighborhood and say, you know what, we have this really terrible person in your neighborhood, and you know what, we can't quite arrest them for actually anything at all because we don't have proof, and maybe we don't have testimony, but somehow we know that they're a very bad person and that you're all in danger. And so since we can't actually do anything in the lines of due process, and we've investigated and we can't find a problem, but we know there is one. So we want you to absolutely go full hog into provoking them, because if we can set them up for a false crime, then we can put them away and your neighborhood will be much safer from someone we have no proof has done anything ever in their lives that was wrong. How do you as a neighbor take that in and accept it? How do you as a neighbor say the police are asking me to commit crimes, actual real crimes that I recognize as crimes, that the state and the local law enforcement recognize as crimes, but I'm being asked to commit them against somebody who they can't prove has ever committed a crime. They just know they have, or even better, or they know they would if we don't put them away before they commit a crime. This is the pre-crime, absolute fantastical, imaginary science. And with pre-crime comes the notion of provocation. We know this person's a bad person, so we can't wait for them to actually do something bad. We're going to provoke them into it for the sake of the neighborhood. Now, who can wrap their brain around such absolute total insanity and stupidity?
That's just like Congress passing a thought crime law, a law on which then gives who exactly clearance to go into the minds of the people, of the populace, to see who's thinking about committing a crime. Now, let's don't look at the fact that there are your nice militarily trained folk who can put thoughts in the minds of people or submit their own thoughts into the mind of the person who they want to, quote unquote, accuse as thinking of crimes. You know, I mean, there's this whole ball of what permissive criminality that our own Congress have fed into.
I think that is exactly right. And all I can say is that Congress and all these, so the NSA, the CIA anyway, because it says in the name, but all of these places are wholesale owned. They are corporate entities. They are owned by the Crown Corporation, which is organized crime. So your congressman, as much as the UK Parliament or any other, you know, certainly the German government, they are, if they know it or not, they are actually owned by organized crime. Some people know, some very, very rare individuals do not know, and they do not get the monetary kickbacks. But the truth is that most of your congressmen get monetary kickbacks from the weapons industry. This has been actually also mentioned online by Ray McGovern in a talk that I've just found recently, where he's speaking to, I think, some people in Germany on a tour. So if you look at the videos that appeared under the name Ray with the keyword Ray McGovern over the last week or the last month, you'll find it. And that's a very, very good speech, actually, and I'm glad it was televised. But he makes this point that a lot of these Congress people get actually monetary literal envelopes, you know, actual cash from the weapons industry. So they are owned. In other words, they are all agents of the Crown Corporation. They are agents. Actually, in the UK, people talk about agents of the Crown, and they think it's got something to do with the royal family, and nothing to do with the royal family. In Britain, they openly talk about being agents of the Crown, you know, servants of the Crown. And that's it. And I guess what we really have to start moving towards is to realize that none of these people, even though they sit in fancy buildings and so on, and have, you know, flashy badges and flashy cars, they do not have legitimacy. They are a private corporation. A private corporation that is mimicking government and the self-governance of the people, but it has nothing to do with it.
A great example of that is the FDIC, which we think is the federal, is a part of the federal government. Really, they're the, you know, the big bankers, and it has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with the federal government.
Exactly. Exactly. And this is entirely untrue. I mean, you know, for example, the Federal Reserve is as federal as FedEx, you know. But one of the things that I would like to finish with, and this is my, you know, final words, is I just show you, this is the FBI. And these are the FBI officers around the world. I got to this by going to the FBI.gov pages and clicking on Contact Us. Now, what I would like to show you here.
Fantastic, Katherine. That's excellent. People need to know the FBI is everywhere around the world as well.
Exactly. And you guys think that the FBI is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That is just a company name. What this is a global private intelligence agencies that sprawl around the world, owned by the Crown Corporation. So this is my final words, and maybe next time I'll have more time to actually quote these people, but I still hear senior intelligence whistleblowers and senior intelligence professionals going around talking about nation states as if they existed or exist. They do not. We just have companies. And actually, these companies are all owned by the Crown Corporation. So all the CIA whistleblowers, I would like to say to them, you were working for the Crown Corporation America. All the NSA whistleblowers, I would like to say you were working for the Crown Corporation. Like me, I was working for the University of Oxford, for St. John's College, which was set up by the merchant tailors of the City of London Corporation in Oxford. I was working for the Crown Corporation, but I didn't know. So when the Crown Corporation, being an organized crime outfit, starts to kill us like a bunch of mafiosis, let's not be surprised. Let's dissolve the Crown Corporation.
That's pretty brilliant. And I'm sure you'll tell us exactly how to do that next time so that we can all get on it immediately. But, you know, in terms of, you know, Canada's got something going, you know, and I think that's another issue. You know, it's part of the whole solutions package. Let's discuss it the next time because we're running out of time today. But it's about withdrawing consent. You know, we literally can withdraw consent. And for instance, when police come knocking on our door, we can say, no, sorry, you can't come in, stay out. You don't have a warrant. There's nothing going on here. We don't need you. You know, so you can say no, you can withdraw consent, and you can push these people out and create systems that work, you know, create systems and societies that work. And I'm all about that. I'm all about, you know, breaking free of this matrix, breaking free of these ghastly horrors with their money and their weaponry and whatnot. They can take their system and their matrix and they can stick it. And I'll just, you know, going off the grid, I suppose is what it's called. And I'll just find my own paradise outside of that system. Thank you very much. So, you know, all good ideas to discuss next time, no doubt. I just wanted to close by saying tomorrow early, well, for me, 8 a.m. Eastern, I'll be doing a live stream with Michael Moore and his, not the Michael Moore filmmaker, but Mel, who is Seven's friend, Michael and his brother Floyd, about what they experienced in London recently with the police assaulting them and what happened. And I'm also going to be showing clips from that because they got the police video. They won the case. And ultimately, they're going to sue for damages as well. So the police video is powerful. I've actually tweeted it out so everybody can go take a look at it. Some of it is pretty long, but it shows the entire incident. These guys walking down the corridor, knocking on the door, and then having protracted conversations, calling for backup, and then barging in and, you know, literally assaulting them. The whole thing is captured on video. And I think people need to speak openly about this, publish this kind of information far and wide. Just as I think about those flyers, perhaps we need to run some kind of campaign where everybody around the US and around the world chooses 3 flyers and we just blanket it or just print out 100 flyers, each of us. And, you know, just go and put it out there on cars, people's houses, etc., you know, something.
Or put it up at bus stops, you know, that's more cost efficient, you know, put it up at a bus stop or take it by the local fire station or the local police station or mail it if you don't want to actually take it there, you know, mail it to them. Put it up in public
That's a
places
good
if it's not
idea.
illegal, But, a bus stop always has some kind of flyer. So that's pretty safe, I think.
I would suggest putting it up yourself. I think, giving it to the police to put it up, they're not going to put it up. They're going to take a look at it and throw it in the bin.
Oh, no. I meant send them a copy for their own education. But if you want to put up flyers in your neighborhood, put up at a bus stop or on a, light post or something where you already see other people putting up lost dog or something like that,
Okay.
I'm not sure what the rules are in the US, but here in Switzerland, you're not allowed to throw in advertising, but you're certainly allowed to mail and write letters to people. So what you can do, I think, either buy envelopes and then you've got the cost of the envelopes and put the flyers in that, or just put the flyers into the post box if you're allowed to do that in the US. And then you just go around like a paper round and just put these flyers into the post boxes of all your neighbors. And then you can just literally inform entire areas.
Yes, well, I understand in the US you're not supposed to put it in the mailbox because
technically you're not supposed to. But if they're likely to not prosecute you for that, but I can't promise they wouldn't.
Well,
but
I
you
can tell you,
put it in a newspaper receptacle. There are mailboxes and then a newspaper receptacle under it, and you certainly can put it in the newspaper receptacle.
So here, for example, in Europe, for all the European viewers, there are laws against advertising. So our post boxes all have no advertising, please. So if it says nothing, you want to receive advertising. So this is how it's done. But this is not advertising. We're not selling a product. This is a national security incident here. And we are informing them about crimes against humanity and about an actual live threat against national security. So surely,
That's brilliant, Katherine. In fact, that is the language we should use, because I'll tell you what's going on in our neighborhoods is, in the name of national security, these people are going and telling lies about us, stating that we are threats to national security. Well, I think we need to write some flyers with some information about national security, that these are crimes that are endangering our nation's security. And in fact, they are, by the use of these weapons. And, I'm going to be writing a lot more about this weaponry. And there are lots of people also writing. But what they are doing essentially is, by hitting me and hitting others with these weapons, they are giving us the tools, they're giving us the knowledge of the existence of these weapons and the actual scope and, the use of these weapons, the methodology of these weapons. So I can describe quite clearly now what these weapons do. Now, are these weapons classified weapons that are important to national security that the US government would like to keep oh so secret? Well, they can't keep it secret anymore when they hit me with it, because I'm a writer and I will write about it.
And I would also say that when it's about weapons that are against the Geneva Conventions, which all of these weapons actually are, national security doesn't apply, right? Because no government on the planet is actually even allowed to manufacture them. So the mere existence in a country is a national security threat that needs to be published to all and sundry to protect themselves against it.
Imagine a country saying, we're not allowed by law, by, Geneva Convention to use these in war, so we'll just use them on our own citizens.
Yeah, but this is the Geneva Conventions, when you're doing that, you have a hostile war situation. And then there's the question of war has been obviously declared, but there's military weapons in operation. It's a covert war. And then civilians fall under, again, the civilian, protected persons under the Geneva Conventions.
Right, non-combatant, unarmed civilians, and they're using war-grade weapons on them. That is insane. That is the definition of a war crime.
Exactly. And a crime against humanity.
Yes. Yeah. So and we ought to point out to the people doing this, because they are being enticed by law enforcement, and they too are being lied to, and they're being told, oh, it's okay, we condone it, you can't be prosecuted. You can be prosecuted, because there's federal law that says law enforcement cannot entice civilians to commit crimes. And there's also, I've already talked about Marbury versus Madison, where you cannot create a law that is unconstitutional and have it be valid. But there's also Norton versus Shelby that says if you follow an unconstitutional law, you have liability. You can be sued, you can be put in prison, you can be put to death.
Excellent. I like that. I like that, Karen. And the last thing I would like to say, I know the entirety.
Yes, on that note.
But also use the word violent extremists. The people, you know, it goes back to what Ramola was showing us in the beginning from the government pages. What we have in our neighborhoods are violent extremists. These are not normal.
And we're not it.
Yeah, we're not it. We're clearly not it. I haven't left my freaking shed for days on end, you know, apart from buying shielding. So how can I be a threat to anybody? Absolutely, you know. So yes.
Well, obviously, this is violent extremism, and it's being directed by the DHS and by the FBI against Americans in America, and, you know, in other countries by all of those other intel agencies locally, you know, the MI5,
Right.
MI6, etc.
The equivalent.
The equivalent, exactly. So, you know, that fact needs to be published for everybody. That fact needs to be published for Congress. Why isn't Congress aware of it? You know, one of the things I did over the 4th of July is watch a little bit of all those conversations with Rosenstein and Christopher Wray and Robert Mueller on the Hill, you know, with people like Jim Jordan and Trey Gowdy questioning them. It was vastly interesting and very eye-opening because it literally gave me an understanding of what these top brass in the FBI are really doing. They're lying through their teeth and they're refusing to answer questions.
Yeah, it's open rebellion. I mean, we are in the middle of a civil war.
You know, Ramola, in 2005, I was watching some congressional hearings. They were actually questioning the FBI, and Mr. Leahy was asking questions. And this guy who was an FBI agent, or maybe even the director at the time, he kept saying, I cannot answer that.
Exactly. Oh, that was Robert Mueller.
Oh, on the basis of the Fifth Amendment. No, he kept invoking the Fifth. And so I wrote to Mr. Leahy and said, well, if an FBI agent has the privilege of invoking the Fifth Amendment, I don't even have the privilege of being given a charge. So then my due process has been violated.
Oh, and I loved when Mr. Rosenstein stepped forward and said, with the most, you know, insipid look of grandeur on his nose, saying things like, oh, that is classified information, and I am not permitted to speak about anything classified. It is illegal to speak about anything classified. And he's talking about the FISA or FISA code applications. Okay,
but the year that I'm speaking of is 2005.
Yeah. Oh, they know how to play the system, you know. And if the congressmen and the senators don't understand that if they don't have oversight committees that have top secret clearance, then they're a joke. Because anything and everything will suddenly become, I can't tell you that's classified.
I think we still have, you know, next time, I still see there's still work to be done, and next time I'll take it apart. But the point that I was just trying to make is that NSA and all these things with classification are private corporations, which, by the way, are controlled by a foreign power. And you are Americans, and you're being murdered to death. You're being tortured to death by a foreign corporation using mostly weapons manufactured abroad because it's cheaper to manufacture them. And you are worried about this private corporation's internal classification system. Well, these are just company internal regulations. They have absolutely no relevance to the law. What you should do is say to these poncy old men is, okay, granddad, well, if you don't sort this out, you will be in jail for life, or maybe hanging off a noose, or, you know, on an electrical chair, you know, very, very quickly, because you are actually working for foreign power, and there's a hostile war against Americans on American soil, and you're an agent of a foreign entity. You are not just a traitor, you are a war criminal operational on American soil. And that you can say to every single member of Congress.
True.
And that's the fact. So forget about classification. It's all a lie. This is what I'm trying to say to you. The FBI, it is a sprawling, global, private intelligence agency.
Yes, but we are talking, absolutely. All true, Katherine. We understand, but you see, the mass of America doesn't understand. The big charade in Congress is still playing out. All of this is still going on. So we need somebody like you to serve them.
Yes, and then also we need to put in the machinery, and this is next time, and I'll shut up now, which is you actually, the law can flip an entire nation on a pivot point. You just have to serve the right things. And then if they don't play ball, then, 100 million people have to start serving the same stuff as an avalanche. And the key is to realize that what you have been dealing all along with is just private corporations. They are not a self-ruling, nation-chosen government anymore. These are just private corporations, and they should be dealt like private corporations, which is they need to be dissolved. The criminals in the private corporations need to be put into jail. And the best thing is, the assets of the private corporations are then used to pay off all the debtors and, the creditors, the people who were giving money. So if you get in your liability claims against the Crown today, the Crown assets, which I assure you are vast and are much bigger than the trillions that are missing, can be used to pay you off.
Wonderful. So maybe we need to be thinking of suing the Crown Corporation rather than the US Department of Defense or the Air Force or the CIA or General Dynamics, or all of them.
They are local branches.
All of them.
All of them. Right. You can name all of them, right? In your lawsuit. That's what I plan to do. Yeah. So anyway, on that note, we should probably wrap it up. Does anybody have any last thoughts to add to this brilliant episode that we had such great fun on?
I want to add, Romola, you were reading the statement written by Gerald Sosby. And one of his closing remarks was that about causing cancer. Electromagnetic weapons cause cancer. In 2008, when it was being announced that I was being used to quote unquote train a state, the person that was talking kept saying, I can give you cancer all over your body. I can give you cancer all over your body. And I just want to make that statement public. It was the voice of Randall Webster stating that. That was 2008. It was 2014 that private investigator Melinda Kidder found indeed microchips or neurotechnology all over my body in 53 places. And many of those places in my thoracic cavity now have been reported to have nodules, either calcified or fleshly nodules. So there was totally criminal intent to give me cancer. And it's by directed energy weapons. I can almost prove that my genetics is not that breaks down into any kind of cancer. I can provide to you medical documentation of all of the things I've done to prevent myself from getting cancer. And yet I still feel like I'm fighting a losing battle. Only because directed energy weapons is the catalyst that is making contact with this neurotechnology that's been placed in my body without my consent. And someone who has already stated they are addicted to killing women has access to government technology.
Yes, I'm so sorry to hear that, Millicent. And, I do hope that can be overcome, with all of those healing methodologies that you're working on currently.
Right.
But you're making a very important point over there that, the insertion of implants in human bodies non-consensually gives people, whoever it is, who has access to sending frequencies into those implants, gives those people enormous power over other human beings. And that, unfortunately, it's what's going on today. And we know it starts with the DoD, it starts with the CIA implanting people. Once this technology is out and about, which it is right now, it's here in the marketplace, then anybody has access to it. It becomes used an instrument for literally running torture on pretty much anybody you like.
Absolutely.
So anyway, so Katherine, Karen, did you want to add to that before we close?
I'm just going to tell police, if they listen to this, if they're new police, you need to make up your mind. Are you an oath breaker or are you an oath keeper? And you need to engage your brain and not just do what your superiors tell you. Are you keeping the law, or are you suppressing people from being able to defend themselves against criminals? And why did you become a police officer if you didn't want to use your brain? You need to think about this. You need to examine it. And you need to decide if your police department is aiding and abetting the murder of American citizens. Are you going to stand up, or are you just going to sit by and hope it doesn't come to your house?
Absolutely. And, you know, I would just add that last note to police, if you are watching, you know, it's your children and your families that are also under attack over here, and you should recognize that. And if you care about America and Americans, you need to stand up. You need to stand up against Agenda 21. You need to stand up against this globalist takeover. You know, you don't just sit back and say, oh, the Rockefellers, the CFR, these guys who have so much more wealth, they're running the police force now. I can't do anything about it. No, sorry. We need police whistleblowers. We need American police in our midst. People who will stand up for Americans and protect our communities from this kind of incredible violence. So, you know, that's what I would say. And I would also say, please stop in and watch tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock at my channel, while we talk about this whole debacle with the UK police. So we can, you know, bring this out. All of this needs to be talked about openly, and people need to stop. The police state will end at the point at which the humanity, you know, really resurfaces and emerges on all sides, in the communities and within the police as well, you know, and that's what's being suppressed right now. So on that note, I thank you all very much for watching. It's been a rather intense show today, and we encourage you to come back next week, and we will be here. So have a great day, everybody, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.